The more evidence, the better, I say.
I mean, this is so improbable.
That's a bold statement.
I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I didn't make that argument. He did.
Why is that true? Is that a good question? Maybe it's not.
That's true. You're not supposed to ask good questions like
sorry,
that.
sorry,
Don't ask difficult questions.
Bill, jump in here.
I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic.
You're listening to The Divide. All right, we're here today with Marissa. Mm-hmm. Marissa, welcome to The Divide.
Thank you.
And you would identify as somebody who doesn't believe in God. Mm-hmm. And the question for today is religion on balance good or bad for society? So what's your take on that?
Well, when you say for society, I think on balance, my take would be that it's not usually a good thing. I think it typically is used to prop up people in power and to justify that power to oppress other people, and sometimes to convince people who are oppressed that that's the natural condition and the way that they should be. Mm-hmm. But I also think that on an individual level, religion can be very comforting and help people quite a bit in that way. So I do think spirituality is a very good thing, and again, on an individual level, can be a great thing. Mm-hmm.
Would you describe yourself as still spiritual, even though you don't really believe in God?
Yeah, I think so, in the sense that I feel connected to the universe and other people, and have a deep sense and drive that I want to be a positive force within that network, and feel connected to it, but I don't necessarily think there's a divine aspect to being a part of.
Is it as simple as breaking it down to where, if it's on a personal level, it can be a healthy, like spirituality or whatever you have it, or even, I guess, religion, if you want to call it that, could be a good thing, but then when it's on a societal level, that's when you have a problem with it? Or is that too stark of a line to draw?
Yeah, no, for me it's kind of the difference between like spirituality and organized religion. And I think when you create the institutions of organized religion, that's when it becomes problematic, and that's when you create us versus them mentalities that create more divides than what most religions are saying they are trying to promote, and that again, I think it becomes entwined with politics and with power, and often leads to oppression.
Do you think this applies to other institutions or other aspects of society as well? So, for example, politics itself is institutional. Universities are institutional. Hospitals are institutional. Are all institutions, from your perspective, corrupted because they're institutional, or is religion uniquely problematic in this way?
I think religion is somewhat uniquely problematic because it's not selling itself as an institution. I think it's selling itself as a moral code, and that people tend to look at the surface of the religion, of the tenets that it's putting out or the things that it's saying it's promoting, and not always looking at what it's actually doing. And I think when you take a quick step back and look at it from a broader perspective, it's pretty easy to see where some of the abuses of organized religion are. Yeah,
there have definitely been abuses. I'm just thinking, there's just off the top of my head, I think there's been abuses in virtually every institution we could probably name. And of course, a lot of people think the government has sort of suffered some problems with corruption and so on. So I was just curious whether you thought this sort of applied to.
I wouldn't say I'm an anarchist. I'm not at a point where.
I was thinking probably not.
Okay.
That's why I was curious if it seemed like, because it would strike me as a little cherry picking, to say that religious institutions, obviously the government is its own kind of moral code. The UN is a moral code. But it's not. I didn't want to be too strong about that.
It is interesting though to try to home in on the question, to try to think about, well, what are obviously you would say on balance that you believe religion is good for the world, and so how do we make those distinctions in politics? Is politics good for the world?
How did you know I was going to say that, Drew?
I think we've been, doing this long enough that I can read your mind.
Yeah. So the one other question about spirituality I'm interested in before we get to that bigger question is, do you see the universe as sort of having a purpose? That there's some sense that we really do have a purpose?
I think we create our own purpose, that we have the time that we're given and we can choose to make that meaningful or not. I do believe that when we're dead, we're completely dead, and there's nothing beyond that. So it's, I don't think you're working towards some afterlife purpose or some, it's what do you want to do with the time that you have?
Yeah, for me, of course, I'm not going to defend all of religion, although generally on balance I think religion is a good thing. But certainly I'm a Christian, so I'm going to defend more the Christian perspective. But I sort of see the Christian faith as being not just something that's good for the future, for an individual's future, but that it's actually, creates a better world now. That's not what always happens in everybody's lives, for sure, who are religious or have faith, but I think of it more that way. But what would be sort of, when you say on balance you think it's negative, could you, you referred to a couple things earlier, but what sort of stands out as being especially negative, you think, on balance?
I feel like there are countless examples of times that religion has been used to justify violence, especially us versus them sorts of violence. So, the Spanish Inquisition absolutely sticks out, as a time period where Christians were expanding their influence against Jews and Muslims and used this Inquisition as a way to justify what they were doing anyway. And that even within Christians, right, you accuse someone of heresy, they're burned at the stake, you then get to claim their lands, and that happened very frequently.
Do you think of that as being, to your understanding, as sort of what Jesus taught, or is this just people being corrupted? Or is just, in other words, people just themselves are corrupt and they're using religion at that point, sort of hijacking it?
I don't know that they're hijacking it. I think, especially in the case of the Spanish Inquisition, I think Isabel and Ferdinand truly believed in what they were doing. But I think they were able to believe in it because of how well it justified what they were doing.
I guess I'll jump in there and say that, I can sort of see what you're saying about sometimes it's the true believers that where it can really be a problem. I wouldn't want to pin all of the atrocities of that have been perpetuated by people in the church or in any religion. I wouldn't want to pin that on religion per se, but I do think that there can be actual problems with things you do specifically, like you were saying, Marissa, because you believe them. You happen to be wrong, you're misguided about your religion, but it is your religion that's causing you to do those things.
Yeah, but in her example, you'd probably agree with me, I think, maybe you would, that I sort of look at those things as having done irreparable damage to the Christian faith, and I think they were in defiance of the clear statements from Jesus. Well,
I guess that's what I was trying. I was trying to make that distinction. I don't think I did it very well, but thank you for letting me clarify. I think that no, that's not what Jesus taught. No, that's not what probably Orthodox Christians believe in most times and places across history. But it is, like Marissa said, based. It was because of their belief. Wrong, misguided, whatever. But still, the religious beliefs can lead down, paths that would otherwise not have happened. You can't say that.
And I also disagree that it was short term. This was several hundred years that prevailed, and then it carried on from Europe to the new lands where they used religion to justify enslaving Native Americans because they were going to save their souls by putting them on these haciendas. And we saw that all the way up into the 1950s with taking Native American children from their parents and putting them in Christian boarding schools. I think even more recently than that in places like Australia. And I don't think that's specific to Christianity in any way. I think that's true across all religions. That, I mean, if you can look at the Aztecs, or the Incas making human sacrifices to make it rain, those sacrifices that were given were also ways of gathering power and keeping people in line.
So maybe we can all agree that it's some of both. It's some people that truly believe in, that the religion is leading them down this path, and it leads them to do things that are abhorrent. And then on the other side, sometimes people just completely co-opt religion for their own purposes, and it's not legitimate at all, and they don't really believe it. They're just using it as a. And you could make a case that both are a problem involving religion, but I do see your point, Bill, that the latter case, at least it's really people that are the problem, not the religion itself. In the other case, it is the religion that's leading the people to those ends, even though they're maybe misguided about what the religion is teaching.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the William Golding, the author of Lord of the Flies. He has a famous quote, which is not in my head at this moment exactly, but that the problems, I know what it was. It's the problems of human society are the problems of human nature. So, and he was an atheist. And I would say that, to me, that rings true. It doesn't matter really whether an institution or organization is religious or not. It's people's strong beliefs. I mean, the French Revolution was abhorrent. Much of what was done in Russia, not in the name of atheism per se, but in the name of the state being the supreme power and some new moral code that's, part of the communist psyche. They did just absolutely horrific things, but I would say you could say it was sort of a religious type belief, but in the end, it was just a belief. It was a powerful belief, a passionate belief. Whereas for me as a Christian, it means a lot that I can turn to the scriptures I think of as holy, and say, look, if you're behaving this way, the Inquisition, and so on, you're in direct and obvious defiance of clear teachings of Jesus, and that matters a lot to me. I know it doesn't take away from the incredible damage done by people, but I think people have done terrible things, whether their belief is religious or irreligious. It's just any really strong, passionate belief can lead to violence, can lead to all sorts of horrible things, and I think of that as more human nature than grounded in religion. So what would be your response to that?
I mean, I think that kind of goes back to my little, both and situation. I do think that's, a lot of it, and maybe they're intertwined, but I do see on the other side things that people would not have thought to do otherwise. It's not like they're, just trying to find a justification, but they're informed. Their thoughts and their plans are informed by their religion, and that's why they're doing it. Now we can argue about their orthodoxy, but that's the cause, the catalyst for their action. And
do you think then of, like, with the French Revolution, the Red October, and all the stuff that was done in Russia, do you think of that as being sort of a quasi-religious belief? Is that how you think of it? Because obviously those beliefs motivated them to do horrifying things. So it was secular, right? I mean, it was not religious belief on the surface anyway.
I mean, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I think of those the way that I think of any other conflict, like the Civil War or anything else, that it, especially the Russian Revolution, really was, you had a completely incompetent oligarchy running a country with a lot of poverty, and it makes sense that people rebelled against that.
But it was openly atheistic, right? I mean,
well, but what I think the difference is that people were openly acknowledging that we're fighting because we don't have our physical needs in this life met, right? They're being very open about what their motivations are. That's different than saying we're going to, take your children and put them in school, and religion lets us pretend like that's for their benefit and not for us to integrate them into our society and destroy your culture, right? You're not
Or
being
not even
open
lets us
about your
pretend that
motivations.
we really believe that we're doing some good here,
Yeah.
and we're
we're
we
justifying
believe that
our
because
harm
of our
because of
religion.
this.
I mean, I'm no expert on Marxism, but I have read Marx, and I mean, the people who avow Marxism, as far as I can tell, as they did, it was definitely a strong positive belief that they were doing what is good in the world by destroying the nuclear family and taking away what were, for probably most people, cherished values. So I don't really see that as being different.
I guess I see your point that any belief system, whether it's religious or completely irreligious, can drive you down that sort of a path. But
yeah, you think you're doing what is ultimate good, and it can lead you to. I mean, it's demonstrable historically. So I'm curious. Is it?
Well, maybe to put a different slant on it, another thing that kind of came to mind for me was that sometimes, the religious believer, the true believer, isn't really led to do anything, like these periods in history where, whether it be the Inquisition or you talked about with Native Americans, they're physically harming people or they're doing things outwardly. But, I was thinking about, it can also sort of be oppressive inwardly, I think, for some people. And again, you can argue that their misunderstanding is the catalyst for that. But I do think that, if you were to ask me if they'd be better off without religion altogether, in those instances, I would certainly say yes.
And I can add kind of a personal example to that, right? Working with the Pittsburgh AIDS Task Force, one of the first events that I...
Excuse me, that was the Pittsburgh AIDS
Task Force, yes, which is now called Allies. They've rebranded. But one of the events that they did was kind of a spoken word event, and there was a Black, gay, African-American male who was HIV positive kind of telling his story at this event. And the thing that was most painful for him about his HIV diagnosis is that his church community rejected him. And, that internalized shame from that code, that religious understanding that they had, was more painful to him than the actual HIV. But when he was able to find a new church community that was accepting of him, that was very, very comforting for him to be able to have that again. And that's kind of the positive side of spirituality that I see. But when you talk about that kind of inward shame, right, he had internalized that message from that church that had kind of made him an outcast and said, I'm a terrible person for having this disease, for being gay, for being who I am. And it caused a lot of personal harm that was the narrative. And, I think you can argue that at its foundation, almost any religion says that, it's bad to kill other people or harm other people. But have we ever really applied that? Like, are humans capable of taking that message and actually living it? Because almost every example of religion has become, we're right, you're wrong, and we're not going to accept you because you believe differently than us, or we're going to actively harm you because you believe differently than us.
Well, I'm not sure every religion is not. It's not that everybody who's religious or every church has been like that. We're going to harm you if you. There's a gazillion churches that aren't harming people because they don't believe what they think.
Well, if I was going to try to jump on Bill's side, I would take your example and say, well, you have one church that was bad and then another church that was good. So we really can't say that religion is on par.
Even Stephen?
Bad. Yeah. But what I was thinking about was, I was going to kind of turn this to you, Bill, and say, well, what if you were just to say that, it's really the dogmatism, as we've kind of come back to that on previous episodes, and that can be a problem, is sort of believing something sort of almost to, almost against your better judgment,
Yeah,
so
right.
But what if, I think we could certainly agree that other institutions can be problematic too, and to the extent that you're dogmatic about Marxism, that may lead you down some bad paths. So, would it be fair to say that, that's the real problem with a religion, is when it's believed
blindly, sort of.
Well, blindly and so dogmatically. See, this is where I'm going with this. I have a feeling that you're not going to give up the fact that that there are some truths that you need to be dogmatic about.
That is correct.
Okay, but that I think is probably where I don't want to speak for Marissa, but where I would come from in saying when I point to things like she's pointed out or like we've all pointed out in this conversation that can be problematic for religion or for other institutions. Yeah. That's kind of the root of it. And that's what makes it so, like, if you really, really believe that you need to pursue the Spanish Inquisition, it cuts off your better judgment. It cuts off your saying, oh, wait a minute, maybe we don't have to do this because we believe this and it leads to this and this, rather if you come at religion or Marxism or politics from a less dogmatic, let's be holistic about this, let's try to take the good where we can find it. I don't know that I'd have as much of a problem with it.
Yeah, well, and I think you have to think about the harm, too, in a very broad sense. Like, I don't just mean physically harming other people,
right.
But I mean even not associating with certain people because they don't go to your church. Or I consider, the enforcing your religious beliefs on others to be a form of harm. And I think that happens politically very much in other countries, whether it's abortion rights or anything else. I mean, I consider that a form of harm on my own person to try and take that decision away from me because of your religious beliefs. And I had another point, but I forgot what that one was.
Well, going back to the dogmatism thing, I mean, like I said, I'm fairly sure you're not going to give up that some beliefs need to be held to, despite what our human judgment might say. But that seems to be a pretty good answer to how religion could lead down that sort of a path. Like anything you hold to, dogma.
Yeah. So a couple of things come to my mind. The first is if you were to take, say, love your neighbor as yourself. The type of harm you were talking about, the examples you gave, I would think, except the one about abortion, which would probably be a whole other podcast. I would again say I'm thankful I can turn to Christ's teachings and say, yeah, well, Jesus said don't behave that way and behave another way, which is the way it sounds like you would approve of. Him hanging out, at dinner with people who were prostitutes and tax collectors, which I'm sure tax collectors love. But that's in there as if they're. But he was clearly associated with the disadvantaged and oppressed and marginalized, and this is a very appealing virtue, and it's something probably all of us agree is something worth being dogmatic about. It sounds like you have a strong opinion that we should be more welcoming to a disparate group of people, particularly those who might be marginalized, disadvantaged, or what have you, that in a way that I would say is very much in alignment with the positive aspects of what he taught. But for me, it's bigger than just the moral questions. Although even on that score, I would say it's great as an American to say, from my perspective, that the founding fathers recognized that the state doesn't create the rights, but that the rights were provided by God, where the unalienable rights are endowed by a creator, and the state isn't the final arbiter, hasn't been the source of these rights, and they're bigger than a state. And the reason that's important to me is because it means the state isn't the highest power. They can't just act as if whatever they decide is morality, that is the standard for morality. I think of that as hugely important for times when states like Germany in the 1930s go off the reservation, so to speak, and start believing things that would be commonly viewed as abhorrent within the Christian worldview, and there's something beyond that you can hang your hat on that is anchored in something eternal, eternal value, and so on.
Let me push back on that a second, because I get what you're saying about a moral standard that's higher than the government or the church even. I mean, it's
any one church.
It's a supernatural standard passed down from the Creator. Well, how is that discoverable, though? That's what I see the appeal of the concept, but I don't see the practical usefulness, utility.
Yep.
How do you get at whatever that? Because you can't trust the church, you can't, because it's a human institution.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It'd probably be its own podcast, right? Because it's a whole separate issue from whether religion is good or bad on balance for society.
But it almost sounds like you're trying to get at the issue.
In other words, in our case, we have, at least we have the Quran and the Hebrew scriptures, and we at least have some content to work with that represent real religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm. I would, I guess, also kind of push back on that, because the idea that you need religion to be welcoming of all people doesn't fit with my personal outlook, certainly. I work with a lot of different people clinically and also in terms of what I want my career to be, and none of that is religiously motivated. I think there are other ways of wanting to care about others besides religion, and I think when you're able to find those and tap into those, it doesn't come with a label, so it doesn't come with an us versus them mentality. It doesn't come with a I'm saving you mentality, which we certainly see a lot of in sub-Saharan Africa, and I think does more harm than good, even though it's, again, religion motivating this surface good action.
Yeah. And to be clear, you people wouldn't know this, but you lived in Uganda for a while, and
yes, and
speak firsthand.
Yeah, and certainly there too, we just see more of these negative consequences of religion on a broad scale level, with seed faith being a very large component. A lot of money is taken from very poor people and put into very rich churches. And its religion is basically reinforces this idea that your life circumstances are your fault because you've done something to deserve it, right? If you were more holy or praying more, doing things more, your situation would improve. And I don't think those are the factors that are keeping people in the situations where they are. And I think it does create that internalized guilt. And sometimes people put up with absolutely terrible life circumstances because they think they'll be rewarded for it in the next life. And all that does is serve the purpose of the people who are in power, who are enjoying the wealth. And it keeps people from questioning that, I think.
Well, I certainly didn't mean to suggest I thought that non-religious people couldn't have a high sense of morality, obviously. I think both of you do. From my perspective, it seems like the view you've adopted is the view that is unique to the Judeo-Christian tradition, that at least certainly wasn't true in the Roman and Greek worlds that I've looked at until the influence of Christianity and the Hebrew scriptures and so on. So the love your neighbor as yourself is from Leviticus. So I see that as more like you're an heir to this unique moral tradition, and it's appealing for good reasons. But I certainly don't think of a person as being. I think of every human being as being moral by nature, and therefore can will good or will bad. And back to the thing about. I don't think it's just about morality. From my perspective, the benefit of religion is that it's not only providing a moral framework for society, but also providing a larger intellectual, philosophical framework on big questions, ultimate reality. The origin not so much as sort of the creation story of the universe, but what explains, what accounts for the fact that there's a universe at all, what justifies science, what provides, as we already said with morality, a backstop sort of for morality and some accounting of it. So I think of it as being broader, and when I say that I see it as being good for society on balance, I think of it as providing more than just a moral sort of constraint or anchor, but also intellectual and philosophical sort of paradigm that allows you to cohere the whole of human experience in some unified fashion that justifies the various pursuits we undertake as human beings. Whereas without that, it's the sort of agnostic view I tend to take as being more like. There's not necessarily an answer for any of that, but I personally have a passion for something, and I go do that. And though I don't have any, I'm totally happy for someone who has a passion and goes and does it. I don't think of that as necessarily a better situation.
I'll give my take on that, and then Marissa can feel free to disagree with it. But I don't have a problem as much with the idea that there could be some kind of almost mystical standard out there. I just don't. It doesn't point me immediately to the Christian religion, although
sure,
maybe some of the concepts were introduced to the West or antiquity by Christianity. That's not to say that was the only way it could have happened, or that it hasn't happened in other ways elsewhere. But I guess what I'm saying is, I don't have a problem with the concepts, moral or otherwise, that you're talking about. I guess for me, it's just not that direct line from the concepts to religion or the concepts to Christianity in specific. So.
Yeah.
But I will say that I don't know where the concepts come from. And it's all like,
that was my point, is that there's some explanation, at least from my perspective.
Your explanation would be that I've inherited this from the religion that the church brought. And, I understand that. I think that...
Well, also, I would say that the sort of Darwinian explanation, scientific explanations aren't excluded. As far as I'm concerned, I'm in the Galilean tradition of, nature is nature, and we can study it as is, and there's nothing to discard from our understanding from science as being a part of that larger framework. What the divide then, it seems like in one sense, if I understand it, it doesn't sound like you all have sort of done anything but sort of fundamentally agree, if I read you correctly, with at least some of the big teachings from Jesus directly on moral issues.
I guess I don't know that it helps to frame them as coming from Jesus. I guess I don't think that's a necessary way of thinking about it. I'm not going to dispute that I'm not influenced by a Judeo-Christian teaching, or that society is not influenced by that. Sure. Whether that's true or not, maybe it served its purpose, and maybe it's not necessary anymore. You look at millennials are the least religious kind of generation that we have, but they're also the most committed to doing volunteer work. If you look at the way that they rank their priorities, they're more invested in helping others than any other generation, and yet they're the least religious.
And increasingly, increasingly you're religious. So it's sort of like like we've seen the light. Mm-hmm. It's served its purpose, and there's no reason to anchor these things anymore. So maybe religion was on balance.
I don't know. Maybe that's a benefit that has come from it. I honestly, I think in every generation, values are socialized from a young age. That it comes from parents, and that it also comes from independent thought, and it does also come from social reinforcement of the people around you. Mm-hmm. And if you're part of a generation that is reinforcing volunteer work, or sometimes it's our institutions, reinforcing volunteer work. We get more recognition for that in schools and things now on college applications. There are different ways of kind of reinforcing that. I think it's almost a stronger sense when you feel like it's a choice that you have made and that you want to be doing, rather than something that some dogma is telling you have to do, and that it can actually be more powerful that way. So,
of course, I'm not really of the position that I have to believe something. I think of it more like it's the best explanation for the world I live in, from my perspective. But where's the divide here, Drew, from your perspective?
I think the divide is mostly on, the things that we all three would agree are good, many of which we would agree on, if not most. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Where do they come from? And do they come from, simply do they come from God, and then through Christianity have they permeated the West, or really the world, I think we could say. Because I would say that even before Christianity, there was this concept of the Tao in the East, and there was a morality there that we would identify with. So I just feel like, kind of like Marissa was just saying, there's more going on than just about 2,000 years ago we got some good ideas, through Jesus, and then they've
So clearly, I'd agree with all that too. So then, but of course, that's a little more of a religious, I guess, offering, right? The Tao Or not really? You think that more philosophical or something? I guess.
I don't. Yeah.
I don't really understand it that well myself. I don't want to claim to know
I
too
never.
much.
Eastern religions don't even seem. The way that the way that I was brought up, religiously, it bears no resemblance in my eyes. So
to what degree I've read them,
philosophical concepts,
philosophical,
I think that would be,
and I guess somewhat religious.
So I guess that's probably where the divide is. I'd be interested to know if you agree, but like I think we all agree that we have sort of made progress to figuring out the things that are good, and
the divide is the degree to which religion is responsible for. We've all agreed there's some good that's come from religion. We've all agreed there's bad things in religion. It's really a question of where the balance, I guess.
Maybe,
is.
maybe this is even better. Maybe it's how necessary is religion? Because I think if we're gonna posit,
that's good.
If we're gonna posit that we can throw it out, maybe
that's clearly a
Marissa
big
and
divide.
I are saying, and I'll let you agree or disagree. But yeah, I think I'm saying that we would have gotten here some other way, and to some extent, we have gotten here in other ways. It hasn't been just religion leading the charge, but I think it's been.
Or can we get rid of the negative consequences of organized religion, but still maintain the benefits through other moral systems?
That's what I was saying, exactly.
So, of course, I couldn't agree more with that if the last statement you had said was get back to the actual teachings of Jesus. So there's our divide. Marissa, it's been a pleasure to have you. And thanks for being here. I am Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic. Thanks for listening.
The Divide is produced by Alan and Ben Hawbrooks and edited by John Workman. Dalton Reed handles IT. Join us for further discussion on this topic at our subreddit, TheDividebyiPUB. To learn more about other episodes and who we are, check out ipub.org/thedivide. See you next time on The Divide.